All right, today I'm here with John Schultz Barnes, Jungian typology theorist and ENTP. Today we're going to be talking, of course, about various topics like socionics, Jung, religion, Peugeot, a few other things. But yeah, if you would like to see more of John Schultz Barnes, he's got a channel. I'll link it in the description and in the comments so that you guys can find him. He's working on some projects right now on. I believe you were working on sort of typing movies, not specifically the characters, but the movies themselves, at least to tie it to sort of perhaps your more poetic view of Jungian type and that sort of thing. So go check them out. Links in the description and comments. And yeah, let's start with the notion of duality in socionics.
Okay.
So I was just curious, like, what is your experience? Because obviously, with the inferior function, here's the interesting thing. You can view it as a function axis, right? You can say, for example, if you are leading with extroverted intuition, you have repressed SI. There's a seesaw there, where if the intuition's high, the sensing's low. But on the other hand, we are making this sort of move to say that in some sense they're inseparable. There is a sort of cognitive feedback loop there that we're saying that they have some relationship where in socionics they would take it a step further and say you value both. So they make the distinction that on one hand, extroverted intuition strong for an ENTP, SI is weak. However, with that being said, both are valued despite the SI being weaker. So what has been your experience with that sort of claim or way of looking at it? And feel free to, say where you diverge. I'm not trying to affirm that position by any means.
I think the both are valued thing is right. Because I take the IDR Labs kind of function axes approach to thinking about the functions, which essentially says that the functions are the opposite functions are doing the same thing, but they're doing it from different ends of the spectrum. So it's like any SI is trying to get a very kind of global view of the truth in all cases and everywhere and every permutation. And NE wants to, explore those permutations, and then SI seems to kind of like want to gather all of those permutations into this one totalizing concept map of the relationships between those things. So that's I think the socionics people are right in that they're both valued. Just my experience with that. I mean, I don't know if I've ever met an ISFJ who this just was like, was on the like intellectual kind of like plane that I was, not in terms of like ability, but just like in terms of interest. It's like I think SI can be interested in philosophical ideas, but I've never super experienced that in terms of the same zones that I'm interested in. So I don't know if I've ever really been able to experience the duality magic that's supposedly there in socionics. The other thing I'd say is that like NE and NI can do that same thing for each other. Like they can each help each other in those purposes, right? Or if NE wants to say, okay, I want a totally new structure for how things are, like finding an NI user who has like his own really specific take on how things are is helpful for that, and then vice versa for NI for NE. So I don't know. The socionics thing is kind of like, or the duality thing in socionics especially is the thing I'm most skeptical of, I'd say.
Right. So you haven't met sort of an SI leading type that has been receptive to your sort of, I guess what you'd refer to as the expansion of the data set in terms of how you engage with thought objects or ideas?
I'd say I've met SI types who are receptive to that, but in terms of like
Can't play tennis with you going back.
exactly yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I think the big thing that some socionists are hooked on with the NE and SI duality is they sort of have this image of, the NE lead being the harebrained professor, and then the SI lead being the one like basically wiping their ass or something like like that's basically the
I
dynamic.
know.
Like there's the Einstein harebrained whatever, and then there's the nurse or caretaker, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's funny
That
because
happens. It does happen. That is a reality.
yeah, I mean, but then it's like, is that the? It's like they're focused on functionality more than true passionate romance, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's maybe it's the Russian thing of like they're very like, let's look at functionality. Though to be fair, Augusta, the creator, she seemed to be like, well, I was in a benefit relation, and that's, there's a functionality there, but really you need duality to really flourish because
She was in a what kind of relation?
well, she was originally, because she claimed to be an ENTP, and she was in a relationship with an ESTJ, or what would be known as an LSE. And she was like, well, he'd be able to cover the SI side of things for me because I'm bad at SI. But on the other hand, he's seeking FI. I can't give him any FI because I'm FI polar. So there was that problem with that sort of relationship, allegedly. But yeah, I mean, they also have maybe some slightly different ideas about introverted sensing, focused more. I mean, to me, there is a connection there because they are talking about sort of this homeostasis radar. Like, is this comfortable? Is this not comfortable? And you could connect that to some Myers-Briggs idea about, stability in relation to SI, or I think Michael uses the image of a mountain with introverted sensing. So you could make some sort of loose connection there in terms of the conceptualization. However, they also are making a move of calling introverted sensing dynamic, and sort of playing with this idea that it's more about how different processes are affecting people, their internal state. This is why a lot of they represent a lot of SI ego types, whether it be SFJ or STJs, as sort of almost managing the, I don't want, maybe ergonomics of the environment. Like, people are comfortable when things are flowing this way as opposed to that way. Obviously, they'd also make the distinction between how SI blocks with FE versus TE. With TE, they'd be like, it's more like having things move smoothly in this, I don't want to limit it to work context, but just you can imagine work in the physics sense, and with TE, and then combine that with SI having this sort of smooth, comfortable flow to it, as opposed to how they conceptualize extroverted sensing as being more this. And this is where you run into the problem of how Myers-Briggs conceptualizes SE versus TE, because Socionics puts all the force into the SE category. And so you'll have these cases. I'm like way off of like where I started, but
it's great. It's great.
They'll have this. You'll see people in Myers-Briggs who get typed as extroverted thinking leads. There was actually a case many years ago. You may remember MBTV, Damon Gray, Chad Crandall.
Oh, he was an Gray's name I'm familiar with. Yeah,
he was a ENTJ, right? Myers-Briggs style. Okay. And I believe he did an interview with Michael Pierce at some point.
Okay.
And of course, in the socionics community, he gets seen as an SE lead because all that force stuff they associate more with extroverted sensation, because there's an expansive quality to extroverted sensation, you could say. And they read that expansive quality, or I think Jung would call it like sort of chasing the highest pitch. They take that a step further, and they're like, it's trying to impose itself on the environment. Now, they would more they would then get into specifics of how extroverted sensing blocks with introverted logic and be like, well, TI is operating from these axioms of truth. It's universal. And then when you pair that with SE, you've got an SLE who's kind of like, they would see a lot of military leaders like Napoleon. Instead of seeing them as an ENTJ, they see them as an SLE, aka an ESTP, which is why someone like Damon, Chad Crandall, would get typed SLE by modern Western socionics. He get typed effectively ESTP. Okay, of course, they have a different conception of it. And, Myers-Briggs would see that more as extroverted thinking because they're attributing more of this sort of, they're talking about extroverted judging as being more assertive in Myers-Briggs, which connects to Jung maybe better. I don't know. Did you have any? I've been rambling for like too long.
I mean,
so, if you have any thoughts?
I watched one of your shorts, one of your YouTube shorts talking about SE, and like, is this just testosterone that you guys are talking about? Like, it seems like it's basically just like high testosterone. And I had an experience recently where like I was pretty sure this guy was ESTP because he just was like loud and assertive, and I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, like, and he does like the outside thing of like poking at the system. He's like, whatever. He's got this kind of like marginal quality where he wants to be in, but he also wants to be out. Anyways, stuff that I associate with ETP stuff, and I was like, okay, he's probably ESTP because he's just like very assertive. And then I was like, no, this is like totally wrong. Like, he's an ENTP. He's just like very like assertive. I don't know. And I don't know the SE thing. Like, I don't know if SE like wants to impose itself on the environment really. Like, I think of SE. I don't know. I don't have it, but like I think of SE as just like they want opening. They want possibilities to be open to them. It's sometimes it's often quite physical the way those possibilities are open, but it's like they want movement to be possible for themselves. That's how it seems to me, at least. So
right. So they want movement to be possible, and I guess you could, if I were to play around and try to steelman their position, you could say that in order to have this flexibility, you might have to assert yourself in order for any sort of boundaries being placed on you to be, basically you have to act as a bit of a bowling ball and sort of knock things down in order to have that kind of flexibility. I sort of, this is very stereotypical, but I sort of imagine like like their conception almost playing out as like almost like when you meet like a punk skater boy sort of archetype, and they're kind of prickly and mean and kind of rough because they're going against any sort of rules being imposed on them for this sort of expansive freedom. And you could link that to Jung's idea of extroverted sensing and trying to sort of breathe it all in and have all these sort of sensate related possibilities. But there is usually maybe a flavor of assertiveness that comes with that. But you had noted just a moment ago about, I think you had said an ENTP that you had met that was quite assertive, quote unquote. Yeah. And I think that's the problem you get with Socionics, potentially. I mean, I'm sure they would have a response to this, but it's like when you have someone who's clearly dealing with more intuition and thinking related psychological activity, but then on top of that, they have this sort of, they have a backbone, they have an ability to assert themselves. It's like they could put it all on role function, extroverted sensing, be like, oh, they're doing their role function. That's why sometimes they look like this. But this to me sort of speaks to the problem you end up with if you put these notions of force and assertiveness and attribute it all to extroverted sensing. Is you're going to have types that aren't SE leads because of other reasons, but then they still have some of those qualities. So then you have to explain why that is. Now, to be fair to them, they would say that there's the bold, cautious dichotomy in socionics. I'm not trying to torture you with endless dichotomies. No, I could be, too pedantic about it, but they would say that an extrovert, all extroverts, even if they're NESI valuers, if they are an extrovert, they would have extroverted sensing in a bold position. So they would have that sort of cop out. Now you could say like, well, this is why Socionics is like unfalsifiable, because anytime you have a problem, you can just, you know, point to a different part of the 8 function model to explain it or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is why, like, for example, if you look at types like ESTP, ENTJ, ESTJ, SE and TE would always be sort of in the mix, because even with like an ESTJ, they'd say, well, they have demonstrative extroverted sensing. And with an ESTP, they'd be like, they have demonstrative extroverted thinking. And with the ENTJ, they could be like, well, they've got mobilizing extroverted sensing. So all those are bold extroverted sensing positions. Some of them, with the ESTJ, it's not valued, but they would still say it's super duper strong, at least according to dimensionality theory, because they're saying, well, this is an extrovert and an ST. So of course, their 2 extroverted ST functions have to be 4-dimensional, bold, strong, even if they're an SI valuer in the case of the ESTJ. So that's sort of, but then it becomes like, okay, like, how are you going to say, when are you going to say, I mean, okay. They would say the extroverted thinking is more to do with basically like empirics, evidence, how practical application for goal attainment. I know Michael Pierce makes TEFI contextual, because it's dealing, rather than dealing with like a universal truth, it's approaching it in terms of the problem it's trying to solve for practical purposes, for outcomes. Hence why, you know, for example, maybe an INTJ cares less about the theoretical physics and is more like, where can we apply this to further technological advancements, etc. Now, in that case, it's because T is paired with maybe NI, so there's more going on there. But then that's sort of how a lot of sociologists would handle extroverted thinking. And then they would attribute all these sort of impositions on the environment more to extroverted sensing. Whereas I think probably the case that Myers-Briggs attributes, and Michael Pierce as well, at least it seems in his book, would probably attribute some of this sort of impositions on the environment more to extroverted thinking. Sorry, another ramble.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, that all makes sense to me. I agree that extroverted thinking to me seems to be the one that wants, and I mean extroverted judging functions in general, they want to act on the environment. That seems more the domain of EJ stuff. And obviously you get like what you were saying before about, like, you know, you're going to have some kind of you know, prickliness to free yourself as if you're a SE dominant type. But yeah, no, I think of SE, like, I don't know, it feels like it gets like a bad rap as being like, it feels like a much more peaceful function than people seem to think it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. SE types are great. Like they never want to impose their will on you. They want like people to be free. That's like what I see in them.
This is the fun part. This is where it gets really fun, because you could address it in terms of blockings. So you could make the argument that SE paired with TI manifests very differently than SE paired with FI. So a sociologist might argue that, well, when it's with FI TE, it's more about its personal freedom. So they would say like the gamma SE lead is more about, you know, getting rid of their shackles and just being, I'm my own person, and I just want to do whatever I want to do. I'm not trying to impose on anyone per se. Although if someone messes with my freedom, I would have to respond to keep my freedom, so to speak. And then they would maybe more deal with the beta quadra ST types, or what, you know, Michael Pierce calls the theocratic quadra. They would attribute more of the sort of structural impositions onto the extroverted sensing paired with TI. So like they basically make the claim that all the you know, ESTJ, ISTJ stereotypes basically apply more to like the beta TI lead or the beta SE lead. That might sound insane to you,
That does sound insane to me. That's great.
Here's what they're doing. Here's what they're doing. Just with the example of a TI lead with SE in the auxiliary position, they're saying if TI is the universal axioms that it's dealing with, then you combine that with the expansiveness of extroverted sensing in the auxiliary position, it's more, and then extroverted intuition being polar, basically closed off to possibilities. They would basically view that LSI, as in TI lead beta, as being more the one who would kind of be the ISTJ that's a stickler for imposing the rules, so to speak. I mean, that's still an introvert, so they would say like the extroverted sensing is cautious, but maybe with like an SLE, they'd be more likely to say like these guys are gonna kind of impose more.
Yeah, but TI isn't universalizing in the sense of like wanting to have effects. It's more like universalizing in terms of wanting to have the right universal conception of things.
Right. But this is where this is where they're doing the blocking thing, because they're saying yes, TI in and of itself does that, but then when you pair it with extroverted sensing, they're saying it's got this expansiveness to it, and it's like this is the truth. You must follow the truth.
Yeah, I mean, still, like the ISTP would want you to find that for yourself, though. Like they might think that they have the truth, but they'd be like, you need to do it yourself. You need to do the work. You need to figure it out, kid. I don't know.
You need to do your own. Well, they would probably agree that
you get there by yourself. Yeah, the Socionics would agree with how ISTPs would say that.
They would probably acknowledge that if you're talking about an introverted type, it's not necessarily going to be super like in your face that they think this is the truth and that one ought to follow the truth. But they might say that about SLEs in some cases, though you need to kind of ground it in examples, I suppose, for this to really apply. I would have to think like, who do they type SLE? Well, we just went through the Chad Crandall example. I know they type Donald Trump as an ESTP.
But I'm sorry, is Damon Gray, he's also known as Chad Crandall? Or
yes, those are. I said both names just in case the audience didn't know one.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the same person. One is his stage name, and one is his actual name. You can guess.
Very cool.
It's very. Okay. Sometimes I forget which one is which because they both sound like. Sorry.
Choosing Chad Crandall as your stage name is much funnier. That's definitely much funnier.
I think that's his real name.
No, yeah, I know. No, of course.
You were saying that you're saying he should have just rolled with that because it was already.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It already sounded like a stage name, whereas Damon Gray. I don't know. There's like a 50 Shades of Grey reference there.
I know. Yep. Yep.
Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about this. I'm such a gossiping.
It's so funny, man.
I gotta chill out. I didn't mean to. Donald Trump. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump's very loaded typing.
Oh yeah, no, there's no controversy around Trump. So, but he does things that they would associate it as like acting on the environment. I mean, I guess that's definitely true. I mean, he definitely wants to create movement in his environment. But I don't know, even with Trump, it seems like there's a motivation towards freedom there. And it's a kind of a personal freedom. It's like freedom of my movement. It's not necessarily like a liberating all of the poor INFP children. It's definitely a personal thing, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely carryover because they would still, identify someone like Alexander the Great or like Madonna as being ESTPs. So you're right, and they're still acknowledging that, hey, this is an irrational type. So there is sort of that part where it is sort of about, I guess, impulsive sensation seeking, and I don't mean obviously sensation is complex. I'm not trying to just make it sound like it's just like drugs and partying or something, but chasing the highest pitch, as Jung would say. So they're still acknowledging that to a degree. But then they also type people like Napoleon as an SE leading type, specifically ESTP. And that's where you would sort of start to see an issue, and you'd be like, well, this maybe matches more Jungian conceptions of extroverted thinking. Now, I'm not a history expert, so I would have to look at Napoleon, but they would just say, oh, yeah, well, he still has TE because of the demonstrative function. But I guess you would have to get into discussion about, are we dealing with a rational type or an irrational type? And obviously, since we don't have that example alive today, it's hard to sort of make some of those cases.
I mean, I know the main like IDR Labs way of distinguishing between the two like ESTP and ENTJ things is like, do you master the books? Like the ENTJ like masters the books. They master the strategies. They master the things that have gone before them, and then they just implement those things super well. And then the ESTP is just like, insane adapting ability, and insane like quick attacks. And from what I know about Napoleon, he definitely falls into the latter category, or the former category of mastering the techniques first.
I see. So
yeah.
Now an example where there's carryover is like General Patton. So like they would both type that person ESTP, and Michael types him ESTP. I know several socionists would type him ESTP. So there clearly is some they are agreeing on some examples. But then you'd have cases also like Arnold Schwarzenegger, where they'll say that's an SE lead, that's an ESTP. Whereas I would imagine like I don't know what IDR Labs types them, but I would think that they go NTJ. Actually, no, they type them INTJ. But regardless, you would say probably more extroverted thinking in that case. Yeah, so there's also like a question of like how we understand introverted intuition above extroverted sensing. Like, I don't know if you see that as playing a role in terms of having sort of a future vision as opposed to just responding in the moment. Do you see that as being like part of the distinction, or do you attribute that more to extroverted thinking being the sort of planning aspect there? I guess there's both. Like, you could say extrovert thinking's, if it's trying to solve a problem, a contextual problem, then it's going to have to perhaps do some planning in order to do so. But then there's sort of the introverted intuition vision, so to speak, that maybe can play with that. So with NTJs, there's a bit of a blend of those two factors, and isolating them is kind of an interesting practice. Which part is specifically the introverted intuition?
Sorry, as you say, introverted intuition vision what is that supposed to be? I just want to.
I think the way Socionics handles it, or at least a lot of Socionists, is they view it in terms of introverted intuition would be the one that is looking ahead to how things are going to play out, sort of the pattern or the trend where things are going. Whereas the extroverted sensing would be much more engaged with the current environment. And although it is flexible and able to respond to what's in front of it, it might not see where they're about to run into a brick wall if they just charge in. So basically, I think Michael Pierce used an example of one of those U.S. generals who was apparently an SE lead, basically charging into the Korean War and thinking that it was going to go smoothly because they weren't projecting far enough ahead with because they had weaker introverted intuition to sort of see where things would lead to in the long term.
Yeah, MacArthur, I think, is that guy's name.
I forget the exact example, but that's sort of the phenomenon I think that at least Socionists are approaching the dynamics between SE and NI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat fine with that. Again, the where things are going. Okay, I would just want to add an ontological corollary to the epistemological thing that they're describing, right? So they're describing the thing going on in the brain or in the mind or whatever. And all I'd want to do is add like, okay, there's there is actually something that exists in the world that this is corresponding to. Excuse me, sorry. And that would be something like perception of forces. That's how I think about NI. Is perception of forces, or something like perception of spirits, like what is moving things. And then maybe that goes into how I think about what a spirit is. It's like what is trying to be incarnated here, what is trying to be realized in reality from, and they get there from little points of movement.
I think maybe that does connect to their conception, because they would say they do have this idea of NI being, I guess, dynamic, and you're talking about it perceiving maybe these it would sort of have this bird's eye view of how these different maybe forces are hitting against each other and where that's going to ultimately lead, essentially.
Yeah. So it's like, So it's like,
I think they would agree with that.
Cup again. It's like, NE is like bouncing off here. Like, okay, what kind of meaning patterns can this participate in? I don't know what they would say. It's something like analogies would be how NE participates in new structures of meaning, right? So that's it's multiplicity from one instance, and then NI is like how does this relate to all of these different forces? It's like, okay, my husband brought home this cup, like what is going on in his head? And like that's a much more like global, like consolidating everything into one force.
Right.
Which
begs, it kind of begs the question, in some sense, the way you just described it, NI almost sounds more universal, in that it is approaching what Michael Pierce would call like the zeitgeist, so to speak. Now, I think zeitgeist might...
Well, okay, sure.
Zeitgeist might relate more to how NI pairs with extroverted feeling, in that it could sort of see, if you looked at human rights activists, whether you're looking at sort of like Martin Luther King or someone like Gandhi or whoever, like they're just there is an extroverted feeling pairing with introverted intuition in terms of how different zeitgeists are basically interacting and where that will ultimately ultimately lead.
Yeah, I think the zeitgeist idea is really helpful for thinking about introverted intuition. Totally. And Jung would put that in the collective unconscious, and I would just be like, why do you have to appeal to the unconscious to be able to perceive the zeitgeist? So okay, but you said the thing about universalizing. I mean, I think yes and no. Like, yes, there's something about introverted functions, all of the introverted functions, which are, beyond the specifics of the environment, right? Because the introverted person is adding this into their whole kind of complex of things. But I always feel like NI is too specific. I always feel like it's too contextual, because I'm like, no, that's just your kind of specific experience of it. If I do this thing where I can see how it like participates in these different like geometric kind of patterns, those geometric patterns are much more universal, and I can communicate those to everybody. Right. So it's like, okay, so you would do something like in the Peugeot versus maybe Peterson kind of idea. It's probably not fair to use Peterson there, but I'll give you a kind of thing that's very Peugeotian, where if you talk about a cup, it's like, what is a cup? A cup it participates in this general kind of pattern of meaning, right? The world that I live in, right? I have to drink water. Therefore, okay, I have to drink water. Water is something which is fluid. I have to have something which contains fluidity. That is what a cup is, right? Whereas it seems like in introverted intuition, it'd be like something like it's hard to get my mind into that. It's like they would think about the archetypal, like what cupness is in their culture or something. It's like there is this movement towards like containing I don't know. I'm sort of falling apart as I'm trying to think about the inverted intuition example. But yeah, they would do something that's not like the extroverted intuition thing.
They would dig into some sort of archetypal image, I suppose.
They would like the cup for them, like the ideal cup would be something like that contains too much specificity in my mind. It would be like a goblet or something. It'd be like this gold thing. And I'd be like, okay, that's cool, but like you need to get away from those specifics and you need to get what a cup is.
That is so interesting, because I was always under the impression, or at least looking in Michael's book as well, and in conjunction with sort of what I've seen more to be sort of the IDR Labs / Myers-Briggs conception of SI. Like I always got the impression that they would attribute more of the specific stuff like to SI almost, because it's like kind of like your example of like, this chair is not supposed to be here. There seems to be something very specific to their lived experience, so to speak. That is, and that's why there's the, usually the association in Myers-Briggs between some, doesn't have to be traditionalism, but basically like these are the codified aspects of your particularist experience, connecting to your concrete particularist experience that seems to be more SI. But then here in your example of NI, on the other hand, you're saying that the NI is the one that gets too overly specific.
That's always how it feels to me. Yeah, and maybe I'm like running up against some kind of like NE and I thing, but it always feels maybe not too specific, but too local.
Define local in this case. I know it's probably obvious, but
it's too it's almost like too incarnate or something. I think, okay, one thing that I think is maybe helpful for illustrating this is the difference between astrology and like the typology stuff. The astrological signs, they are unified. They are one, right? Aquarius is not a intersection of different dichotomies the way that the Myers-Briggs types are, right? So I would associate something being an intersection of different kind of dichotomies much more with an NE thing. And I would associate unified symbols, which are not reducible to intersections of dichotomies or intersections of like relationships where you can like kind of like mix and match and swap them out. I would associate that much more with NI. That's more what I'm trying to get at. It's more like the unity of the symbol than the specificity. Sorry, kind of.
No. This is all great. This is all great, and obviously, like I'm gonna have to think about some of this stuff after the fact. I guess the unity you speak to with introverted intuition, I would almost think that has to the bird's eye view there kind of has to, the archetypal image kind of requires one to step beyond the localized context, such as with Jung's archetypes or what have you. Like they're not ever, I mean, maybe they are. It depends. You could make the argument that Jung is culture, a product of his own time, and he has certain cultural influences, and maybe he thinks that he has this archetype of this thing, but then if you went to another culture, maybe he's like totally off and he's like stuck in his own frame of reference, and maybe that's what you're speaking to with the localized thing. I'm not representing.
I think the localized thing is probably, it's a little bit unhelpful. I think the better understanding is the unity versus the kind of interchangeability of the symbol that the symbols that they're using. Because okay, when intuition is really getting going, when intuition, and maybe intuition and specifically introverted thinking, I don't know, but when it's really getting going, it will create these systems, maybe not systems, it'll create these yeah, we'll just say systems for now. Systems of how meaning works in general, right? And the intuitive, the extroverted intuition thing will, again, that system of how meaning works in general, it will appeal to very kind of basic ideas like up and down, or and right and left, and like very, very basic things that, and then from those basic things like up and down, right and left, they'll combine them in certain ways, and then they'll just derive the entire kind of system out of that. And I focuses more on the like the immediate experience of meaning. So like an NI type will be like, you could do something like with tarot or something. There's this book called Meditations on the Tarot. It's by a Catholic author, which is interesting. But he's like definitely an INFJ. He starts the book talking about the magician. And so, okay, the magician for him represents the experience of play. So they're starting from like this actual experience that you have. And that's the first, they start by creating a symbol for that.
And that's,
rather than doing like reducing this thing into different kind of like more basic meanings. It's like, okay, no, I need to capture what this is in one symbol.
Yeah, I think I understand how you're maybe connecting it as a cognitive feedback loop to extroverted sensing, because it's kind of like this is the lived sort of real-time experience.
Yeah, and then the
experience of play, and then connecting that to sort of an archetypal image. So maybe that's sort of the feedback loop there.
And that's the specificity or the localizing thing that I always feel is it's too local. It's like, because they created a symbol for something that's like actually experienced. I'm doing so many hand motions. It always feels like it has too much flesh on it to be the most basic thing. Like the magician,
so
it's like
you feel like you could almost
too many details here already.
You feel like you could. Okay, so you almost, like, from your own cognition, feel like they're not quite hitting the most basic atoms here.
Yeah,
they're not reducing it down to the bare skeleton, essentially. Or they've got too much. There's still too much flesh on it, or something.
Yeah. It's just like you guys. It's like their atoms. Their atoms are already like contain atoms within them. Is how I'd say it. It's like no, that's you just gave me a fundamental, and I think your fundamental is actually a combination of these other things.
This reminds me back to when we were talking about thinking versus feeling, and you were saying that feeling was the one that brings in the extra shit. Now, obviously, we're talking about irrational functions right now, but it sort of does remind me of that chair example where the thinking would just look at the functional. I guess this is how Michael is basically saying that TIFE is universal and any SI is universal, because basically you as an ENTP would be looking at the universals. So maybe it's not just I apparently would be bringing in almost stuff that you would find extra, as in you can reduce it down further and they're bringing in more shit.
Yeah.
I didn't explain that very well, but
no, but I feel like, one of the, and maybe you already understand this, but I feel like it's relevant. Like you gotta get like away from the chair. Like the chair, I mean, not the chair specifically, but whatever object is the beginning object for their cognition, like the cognition, extroversion and introversion, it leaves that thing. And it's like the extroverted cognition leaves that thing in different directions. It's like, okay, let's like bounce off of this thing. It's like the thing is radiating outward and participating in other things. And that's also true for introversion. It's also about this, how it relates to other things, but it's less of a explosion and it's more of a contraction. So this is why the socionics thing about how introverted thinking is the relationship between parts or between objects doesn't really work, because it's like, okay, what kind of relationship? Is it a contractive relationship, where it's like everything is moving towards this one thing, right? They're all related, but they're all being ruled by this one thing as in an introverted thing? Or is it an explosive relationship where it's like, I want this to actually have as much contact with other things as possible? So that's why extroverted thinking, it's like, that's why extroverted thinking, I think, is practical. It's like, it's these linear effects that are explosive. It's like, if something can't explode outward and like cause things, right? Like, and the causal thing is like linear.
Yeah.
If it can't push things, it's like it doesn't care. But then introverted thinking, it's like it's that linear thing, but it's a contractive thing, and that's why it looks taxonomic.
I think they
Sorry,
would
that was kind of a lot of rambling, but
I think I just didn't articulate TE versus TI from the sociological perspective effectively. But when I was talking last time about extroverted thinking and the term work, abstract the term work in sort of the physics sense, I think that's sort of what you're talking about right now in terms of, you were, I guess, alluding to some sort of impact on objects in the environment effectively with extroverted thinking. It sounded like you were going in that direction there. So I think that's what they mean with extroverted thinking and the term work. So they would, I think, agree with you there. And
yeah, you said the physics sense. Yeah, okay.
With the taxonomical nature, maybe just quickly for both myself, I basically know what taxonomy means, but I think it would probably be helpful if you define it for the audience and myself, just so we know what we're talking about.
I mean, yeah, taxonomy is a structure of categories, a linear structure of categories. So the taxonomy that people are most familiar is the like biological kingdoms, right? So you have a man, right, is a Homo sapiens, right? So it's this, you know, it's at the most specific level, it's sapiens, right? It's the kind of Homo that sapiens, and the Homo has different things underneath it, and then above that, it's like we participate in the category of primate, and eventually we get to these very general categories like just animal, and then we get to like living being.
Okay,
and like
slicing it up, making distinctions. I think Socionics would agree with TI basically being that. They'd also note that they see TI as static, quote unquote. And I think that kind of fits into this theme, so to speak, of I almost imagine, like, I know Peugeot would talk about Adam and Eve in the garden, and he would talk about Adam being the one who is naming the animals, and maybe that's sort of, I mean, you could just connect that to thinking in general, but that's sort of the image that comes to mind with maybe introverted thinking, is it is sort of this taxonomical process of making distinctions between things. And I think Augusta's original description of TI, she would talk about how it's like comparing different things and like measuring them, and basically if these would be in the same category as Homo sapien because they all meet this sort of criteria, and these other things would be in a different name category because they don't meet that criteria. They have a different. Is that sort of in alignment with how you see introverted thinking effectively?
Totally.
So I think there is a lot of carryover here.
Nice.
I was also getting stuck in when I was telling you sort of the original Augusta definitions. Like they've evolved since then. She originally wrote it in a very sort of physicsy sort of way, where it was very abstracted and not really grounded in examples. So it was kind of hard to understand. Like when she just calls TE the movement of objects, like you might be like, what the hell? But basically, every single element she was almost defining more in this physics sense, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, you had expansions later by her where she was getting more into sort of like what it actually is like with actual people. And this reminds me of sort of you're familiar with the idea of information aspects and sort of I think you talked about it in your like 10 years ago in your Socionics video.
My critique of Socionics thing, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously, it's been a long time since then. I don't know if do you tend to forget that kind of stuff, like when it's been like a lot of time has passed? Do you think like because it sounded like you had a pretty good maybe because at the time you were actively engaged with that material, so you were like very familiar with it. It seemed like you had and then maybe now you just forget because you just focused on other things in life and not.
No, I remember that video was very kind of like fundamental, I don't know, to me. It's very interesting because, okay, so one of the critiques I offer there is like, is the thing that it's like, okay, no, you guys make these things all like correspond to specific things in the world, right? And it needs to
You take the
be
user out
more
of it.
flexible. Yeah, you take the user out of it, and it stops being super flexible. Whereas like the Myers-Briggs stuff doesn't make that kind of ontological claim. It's okay. It's like my problem with Socionics is not now that they do that thing where they make the functions correspond to like actual things in the world. It's just that I don't think that their ontology is sophisticated enough to do that. I don't think that they have like basic enough categories to be able to do that. I mean, maybe that's because I don't know enough about Socionics, but I don't know.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah. I'll come during this process. So with information aspects in Socionics, it seems like a big part of what they're doing is basically saying that the data in the environment has a latent identity to it, which I'm not sure how, like, independent of the user, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? Maybe, like, as in there is such a thing as extroverted intuition information separate from the user. They seem to, I'm not saying this is correct, I'm saying this is sort of how they seem to conceptualize aspects. That's why they make the distinction between the information aspect and the information metabolism element. They're saying the user would metabolize this information aspect, but the aspect itself has the data in the environment has a latent identity, which I think.
No, I'm sympathetic to that. I am sympathetic to that. But my question would be: is relationships between people one of the 8 fundamental constituents of reality? Like, I don't think so. I mean, I think it should be more fundamental than that.
Right. So you're
psychological distance.
They're getting too specific there, or too localized.
Yeah.
We'll say.
It's too specific. It's
relationships with people. That would be specifically how some people handle introverted feeling in Socionics.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was appealing to.
Which I always thought was a bit. I mean,
probably the weakest conceptualization that they have, in my opinion.
This is why a lot of times someone who is conceptualized as being an FE type in Jung talk,
okay,
Socionics will think is an FI user because they're associating all this sort of relationship stuff, management, with introverted ethics. So, for example, with Michael Pierce, there was talk, when he first started talking to Jack was maybe considering like, is this guy an FI lead delta? Because in his conceptualization of introverted feeling, he thinks that's sort of the aspect of almost managing the relationship with another person, which is interesting. But then he would also, the reason he's, come around full circle back to also thinking Michael's, an NI lead beta instead, is because it goes back to the demonstrative function idea where INFJs still have FI in the demonstrative position. And then also a lot of, in Michael's book, when he talks about FE not wanting to rock the social boat, so to speak, he mentions that in his book, at least in the context maybe of higher FE. He seems to allude to it. I believe I read it.
Okay.
If I'm misrepresenting what he says,
I don't remember that specific line, but yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll say that there's an aspect of social interfacing that he is referencing when it comes to extroverted feeling. He seems to have that as part of his conception, and not wanting to maybe make too many waves, because his FE is higher than his TI, so he's gonna want to be a bit more, not basically slam the TI on people's heads as much as maybe a higher TI user might. Like maybe yourself, or if we want to pick some other IDR Labs example of a higher TI user, they'd be more likely to more overtly disagree with someone, perhaps, in a way that would potentially violate the social dynamics, the harmony, so to speak. So what I was trying to get to is a lot of the harmony stuff they attribute to SI. So they would just say like, oh, the INFJ's got role function SI and their SE's really weak, and they have FI in the demonstrative position. So that's kind of why an INFJ would be, not so, would still be, despite being beta quadra, more harmonious, so to speak. That's their workaround, because of course they don't attribute the harmony stuff to FE.
Really?
Okay, let me be specific. They would think FE with SI, so with SFJs, they would think that has more to do with sort of harmony, because they think that SI is more the thing making it comfortable, whereas they think FI with NI, especially if you see examples of them talking about an ENFJ, they think a lot of the sort of artistic types that you would probably think are like a Michael Jackson or a Lady Gaga, they think that's like FE-NI shit, because it's sort of again, they think emotional expression is more extroverted feeling, and they believe I'm just telling you, I'm just sharing it. I'm not saying you have to agree with this, but it is basically, it is kind of like when you were talking about expression linking to extroversion. They just take it maybe a bit differently and are like,
yeah, but I mean that in like a metaphysical way, not like this is me,
Yeah. So now they combine kind of two ideas with FE, because they would say it's about emotional expression, but then they also make the distinction that, it's kind of playing with the emotional atmosphere. So with FE-NI, they'd be like, it's portraying an image. So it's kind of like, it kind of works with some of Michael's theocratic quadra stuff, where it might want to craft an image to a certain extent, with certain, imagine like an ENFJ cult leader, so to speak. There is a bit of that.
The ENFJ cult leader is not. It's not about them. It's about the philosophy that they're proposing. That's at least how I think about it. It's like
you're making a good distinction here, because you're saying it's not really about their moods for themselves. It's it's about this sort of bigger. I guess I don't know. Zeitgeist is the right word, but sort of.
Yeah, they're trying to move people. Like ENFJs are like very philosophical in my experience. Like they want to like move people into like, it's like Pythagoras, I know IDR Labs types him as ENFJ. He's like, he's a cult leader, and he's like, dude, it's all numbers. Like that's like ENFJs do that often. Oh, you kind of froze up a little bit. Okay, are we good?
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now. It's better. Okay.
I'll make sure I watch back the footage if there's any weird. Okay. But yeah, I mean, listen, they're partly on the same page as you there, because they probably would type a lot of the same people, ENFJ or INFJ, though they would, with certain examples of certain performative artists, like they might think like Kanye West is an ENFJ. I don't know how you would feel about that.
I mean, I don't know. That's the controversial one. I know IDR Labs types in has ISFJ, which is like the most insane typing ever.
Yeah, they do. They actually type a few rappers ISFJ. I think they type like Kendrick.
I know. It's like, no, Kendrick Lamar makes sense to me though. Kendrick, I get the ISFJ thing for Kendrick Lamar. Like he has very, like, I hate to say this, very therapizing lyrics. Like he does like the philosophy of therapy is like his philosophy. I mean, he's also like a Christian, so it's not totally that. But like that's something that like I think is a easy route for ISFJ to go down. But no, I totally get Kendrick Lamar as ISFJ. Anyways, but you brought up Kanye West as ENFJ.
Basically, they attribute some harsh emotionality displays to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, to ENFJ. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that.
But you're just more trying to look at the psyche, the mechanism, and you're saying, let's make it clear that the mechanism is not about them. That's what it sounds like you're trying to say, is saying, don't mix up these FI leads with
we're like, look how I can move, It's like it's not that. It's like they are trying to move you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. So basically an example like Michael Jackson or Lady Gaga, that they are saying these are beta NFJs, you would probably see them more as FI types, I would think.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not trying to
from
like,
it.
I'm
Like
not trying to
that's from my IDR Labs, prejudice, and then that's also just from like, knowing a little bit about Michael Jackson. Like, there's nothing about Michael Jackson or Lady Gaga that makes me go like, oh yeah, definitely an FE lead. It's just, yeah, they're totally just like in their own world, just like bopping around to the vibes in their head. Like, it's just such an FI thing.
That's interesting. Okay?
Yeah, man. I don't know. The FI thing, I think, is the and the FE apparently is where I really disagree with Socionics, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, they would probably align when it comes to like SFJ typings because of their conception of how SI pairs with extroverted feeling. They would say like they would almost take the homeostasis of SI and mix it in with the extroverted feeling to say that the way that they'll impact the emotional atmosphere is sort of in more this smooth, harmonious fashion, wanting people to be included and laughing and having a good time. And then, of course, they would have more of the sort of harsher emotional impacts attributed to how FE pairs with sort of NISE-ish themes.
Sure.
Which, like I said, you might agree on sort of a surface level with that, but then it seems like when we get into the inner mechanics of the person's psyche, you just want to make the distinction that where is it coming from? Is the feelings for them some like individualist thing, or is it more about the people? And they don't really make this distinction, it would seem, if they're taking people who are maybe they view a lot of sort of individualist style artists as being more beta NF, essentially. I've probably rambled about this long enough.
It's interesting.
It's interesting. How do you, when you look at let's say an FI lead performer, and we don't have to go into a specific example, but like, what do you think is happening there? Because they're still making the choice to get up on stage and perform to people, which you would think there is still a desire there to, I guess, impact the audience in some way. What do you think psychologically is there that is so distinct from extroverted feeling that maybe Socionics is missing out on?
Okay, so I think there is a way in which FI does a universalizing thing. I think that's important. I don't think FI is totally idiosyncratic. They seem to take their experience and it's a wavy experience, right? It's a chaotic kind of like, there's lots of stuff going on, lots of emotions, maybe could use that language, and they like order it into a story, right? It's not a violent ordering. It's not an ordering that like pushes or like cuts the emotions up. It's a story that the emotions kind of like find rest in, right? It's that experience that you have when you listen to music and it doesn't seem to quell your emotions. It doesn't like cut them off, but it actually kind of like intensifies them and gives them their proper meaning, right? That's what I see the FI type doing, is like giving internal experience the proper structure that can order it and intensify emotions, like give emotions what they're supposed to do, right? And then they share that with the world. So, right, in terms of like the ordering thing that I talk about, or like the field thing, it's like they have like this experience of reality as extremely complex, and they take what they see as all that movement in reality, and they kind of like bring it all into this one singular aesthetic, and like that's what their stories are. I'm gonna, spoilers for the movie analysis thing that I'm doing, but have you seen the movie Amélie? It's a French movie.
I have not.
it is INFP the movie, right? It is like how they experience the world in this kind of like magical realist like aesthetic thing. And then, they get up on stage and, people connect with that because the thing that they have discovered orders their world well also orders other people's worlds well. And that's the universalizing character that FI has.
Okay. I want to, if we could switch gears here for a moment.
Sure.
Because I don't want to torture you too much with the socionics community conception of things. I just think it's interesting to see those divergences.
Yeah, sure.
Carl Jung, you've read probably how he describes introverted sensing.
And, yeah, I'm sure, but I would have to look at it again. Right.
Well, that's sort of the feeling I get every time I think about Jung's conception of SI. Like I have to go back and look how he even talked about it because it was it seems like there's a gap between how he described introverted sensing and how Myers-Briggs took that. Like there's the leap there seems much greater than any other function.
Really? Okay.
Maybe I'm tripping. Like I understand you can abstract what he's saying and connect it. But
doesn't he get into like aesthetics, like how introverted sensing? I think I seem to remember that how introverted sensing is like. It's like you.
He makes it way more artistic sounding, I think. But then
yes. Yeah. No, definitely.
But then they have the SJ idea more in sort of the Myers-Briggs community.
Oh, right.
Those don't seem to connect perfectly.
Well, SJs though are pretty. I mean, they operate, I think, on like an aesthetic sense. It's often just like people critique them for this. It's often just very limited aesthetic sense.
Right, but Jung sort of makes the point that, yeah, I mean, you could say Jung is sort of he's playing with the idea that rather than just paying attention to the object itself, it's more the impression the object makes. So back to your example where that girl you were talking to said, I think she said that chair is not supposed to be there. You could say that does have a connection to sort of this idea of an internal impression that the stimulus is making and focusing in on that. And maybe that's the relationship between Jung's more abstract explanation of introverted sensing and connecting it to maybe a more grounded Myers-Briggs sort of. They have more of like they focus on more of being sort of detail oriented or.
Yeah. Essentially. Yeah, I don't know. The impression language is sometimes a little vague, I feel like, though, because I don't know if like the idea of an impression really captures the it's not exactly synthetic, but the way that SI seems to understand relationships between things, right? That everything is supposed to be in its place in the relationship map,
Right. So your conception of SI is it's like a map function, effectively.
Yeah.
It's your codified sort of map of reality.
Yeah. I would say that's right.
Whereas Jung's more focused on sort of the person having these internal experiences that are elicited by the object that go beyond the object. So he would say like they might to this person this just looks like a can of Celsius, and but within them they're having this experience that is apparently going beyond just the extroverted sensing data, so to speak. Within their own psyche, it seems like he's talking about it in that way. So he makes it almost sound more abstract, essentially. And that if they were an artist, like it wouldn't be a painting of this can of Celsius. It might be maybe what is that kind of art where it's more about the feeling it creates in you rather than it being like a proper photographic representation of the thing. That kind of art is what he seems to link it to.
Yeah. Yeah, I see this. I think this is a place where my novel conception of introversion really takes me away from how Jung talks about things, because it's like Jung, it's like you go from the object immediately just to like in your head. And I want to talk about how introversion is stitching together kind of all of reality for the introverted types. Like that seems to be their thing, is like, I don't know, it's this contractive thing of all of reality. When they experience objects, they experience them in relationship to that contraction.
So with SI, it's almost like it's that web of reference points essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas SE might just deal with what's in front of it and forget about any sort of reference point it might connect to. And
Yeah,
that's
and
where
then
SE,
blow it up in terms of possibility, just be like, okay, where can these
yeah,
things go? How can I move within these things? Yeah.
that's basically what Michael Pierce probably means when he says contextual with extroverted sensing, because it's dealing with the object as is, as opposed to,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe,
Not in view of, all of history or whatever.
right. Yeah, that's interesting. There was something else I wanted to speak on with you. Oh yeah, when I was looking through Michael's book, when he did the connotative versus denotative, that basically lines up with the internal external dichotomy in socionics, I think, because he's saying that the sensing and thinking is denotative, and then of course the intuition and feeling is connotative, which when sociologists do internal versus external, they're just saying like the external information, so sensing and thinking, regardless whether it's introverted or extroverted, is dealing with more explicit data, so to speak, and the intuition and feeling is dealing with the more implicit data, which is kind of what I think he's doing with denotative versus connotative, at least from the parts I was reading. I don't know if you think that those are in alignment. To be clear to the audience, internal external is not to be mistaken with introversion and extroversion. They're making the point that sensing and thinking is more external, which Carl Jung kind of alludes to that, in the sense that sensing, even if it's introverted, is in some sense has that explicitness to it. Ditto for thinking to a degree, because if you're dealing with the functionality of something, even if it's more introverted, there is an aspect there where you can explain it more in terms of the explicit data, as opposed to something more abstracted, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're making a metaphysical point there. They're saying that stuff you can touch and measure is the stuff that's really out there, and then intuition, the structures that emerge from that are
We're more implied.
functions of the mind that we use. I mean, that seems to me that kind of a mistake. I mean, I do think there is something there. I don't want to like overstate my case. Like, there is a way in which introversion, intuition, and feeling are all related, like, for sure. I would do the annoying NE thing and be like, but I don't think that is the most fundamental grouping. I don't think that grouping is more fundamental than the actual individual dichotomies between extroversion and introversion. Right? I don't think the contextual versus universal dichotomy is more fundamental than introversion versus extroversion, or intuition versus sensing, or thinking versus feeling. All right, and right, the socionics thing is it's very NE. It's like they don't think that either, right? The internal external dichotomy, right? That's just like one.
That's just one. They would cross it with more than one dichotomy, and you'd have the intersection of internal, external, and introvert, extrovert. You would also have this idea of basically attached versus involved.
Right.
Where you could also pair together the sensation and feeling and say this is more viscerally felt, whereas the thinking and intuition is more detached, so to speak. They might play with that notion. At least that's how Jack Aaron sort of plays with it. Different sociologists might highlight different points, but sort of those intersections would definitely, like, they wouldn't just focus on one side of that and be like, that's it. It would be like the picture makes sense when you combine, you know, three different dichotomies, and then it's like, okay, now we're cooking with gas, so to speak. But we don't need to delay on that too much. Did you have something you wanted to discuss specifically in relation to what you've been thinking about? I know last time I didn't maybe give
No,
you.
I mean, I was very happy with how I talked about NE and NI. I think because I haven't really fully articulated that to myself before. So I was very happy with how we did that. I mean, the thing I kind of thought we were going to discuss, and I was kind of nervous about it, was just like the duality stuff in socionics, which is funny that you started there, but we didn't talk about that too much. Yeah, if I were to make it like any like points or whatever, I just like, I think people need to, and this isn't a point that the IDR labs people have made before, it's just people need to learn a lot more about the human person that is not related to typology stuff. Yeah. And another one of my critiques of socionics is that it tends to reduce like everything about the person to typology stuff, which I think is a big mistake. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, I've spoken to some people who, you know, believe that maybe sociotype more accounts for what we could say is information processing, but then when it comes to things like your neurosis, maybe that should be handled by conceptions like Enneagram, for example. Now, that might not be your preferred avenue, but you could say that, you know, you can deal with what you were saying before, that there's a lot to human psychology that goes beyond this beyond Jungian type, and you know, you could have peculiarities related to an individual experience that maybe can't be fully accounted for with your cognitive function model or whatever.
Yeah,
that you need to explain with maybe a different framework, or maybe you don't even, I don't know, maybe you don't even use a framework. I don't know what specifically what you're alluding to, that you'd feel that cognitive functions would be too reductive to basically approach some of these human things.
Yeah, I think you need a wisdom tradition, like a religion, to really to be able to do, like, I feel like to be able to do typology long term, you need a wisdom tradition. You need another robust understanding of the human person, and one that captures what all humans are oriented towards fundamentally. Because the temptation with typology is to be like, okay, well, this one is to focus on the differences, right? Yeah, so you need some kind of conception of like, what is the purpose of being human generally, I think.
I see.
I mean, so, I don't know, to not go insane, but like to be a pretty like, well, like, I don't know, integrated person, I think. And you also need to like touch grass a little bit. You know, I think that's a pretty big temptation in typology communities, is like you get this like very strong like understanding of the human person. Like, you think you understand the human person because of that. It's like you haven't ever, like, I don't know, met a really damaged human being before. Like, you don't
right know. Like they might see someone who's had some trauma and then assume that that's a feeler because look at all this emotional content. But you could say like, well, it's not so simple. Like, there's some things that are just human things that it'd be unwise to just attribute them specifically to a cognitive function. Is that sounds to be kind of like what you're effectively getting at.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Kind of reminds me of sort of that IDR labs thing. They were thinking about TIFE being that at bottom humans are actually quite similar, and maybe that's reflected in your approach here, as you're saying, well, like, some things are just generalized human experience things, and to specifically link that to an information metabolism element or a cognitive function, you're getting way too zoomed in. And maybe that's why you were kind of alluding to a more poetical approach to typology, as opposed to getting super localized and specific with like this function slot handles this thing, and this particular element, if it's in that function slot, would function this way. And it's, you know, very sort of mechanical, and maybe you feel like some of those mechanics are just general human things, and attributing it to an exact function slot with a certain element being in that slot is a bit reductive.
I mean, especially with the feeling function stuff, like in socionics, like I think the psychological distance thing is kind of ridiculous in introverted feeling. Yeah, like that's just like that's love. Like love isn't supposed to be like relegated to a cognitive function.
Yeah. Well, the way people usually, like, if, for example, with the psychological distance thing, a lot of people who identify as being ENTP or ESTP in socionics basically are like, well, I'm FI polar, so I have a hard time gauging my psychological distance with me and another person. There's like almost like some, I guess, autistic qualities they're almost bringing
I mean,
in there.
there is a way in which that's true. Yeah, there is a way in which that's true. I admit empirically that is a reality, but like I feel like that's also just my like natural goodwill for all of humanity. Like I don't know. Maybe yeah.
What do you mean by that? Your natural good.
Like I mean, as a Christian, you're supposed to love everybody. Like
Oh, I see. I see. So like, yeah, and you're saying basically in your own approach to just life in general, like you're gonna give people the benefit of the doubt,
yeah,
as opposed to, which is funny because that's something that basically they would use to tell apart NTPs and SFJs. They would be like, well, the NTP or alpha quadra is more like there's more, because of the extroverted intuition and the lack of FI, that they'd be more, kind of more open-minded and being like, well, just, I'm not going to assume this person's like a bad person or something. And they'd say like the SFJ is more like, or not the SFJ, the SFP is more likely to maybe sort of assume maybe bad intentions or something preemptively, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I do see that happening. I do see that happening, but these are also kind of like moral problems that I don't think you should reduce to the type. And this is why I don't like Enneagram. It's because like they make types out of moral problems. Like the types should be kind of like, there should be a pure expression of the type that doesn't have these moral problems, if that makes sense. Maybe that's TI idealizing or whatever.
So you don't think you could like just take moral problems and categorize that?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if you do, I think that's a huge problem for your system, because like we're supposed to be able to transcend ourselves. Like,
well, no, like not with your Jungian type system, but you could have a separate system where it's specifically designed to track essentially like your specific neurosis.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of gets into a critique of psychology generally. I mean, to reify your neuroses into specific types, I think presents a pretty big danger. I mean, there's a way in the Christian tradition where it's like, you should know kind of a little bit like what kind of temptations are going to present themselves to you based on what kind of person you are. But like those things are really like not fundamental to who you are. Those
okay, so
those are from the devil.
okay. So do you feel like you're sort of opening a door, or it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're like, I'm this type of person and I have this kind of I don't know, attachment style or neurosis, and accepting that as being like, I'm this type of person, you're saying is problematic because you're saying that is part of the true you. And even though that's more going to Peugeot, it's kind of like there's the chaos elements that I guess are not the truth effectively. So you shouldn't identify with that stuff because that's like you said, that's the devil, that's the chaos. Yeah. That's not a part of you, the order identity that is you. That's that's outside influences coming in and can potentially hijack you, but you should never identify with those things, even if you think you have like, even if you perceive some sort of tendency there of you gravitating towards those things, you should never codify that as being a part of your innate ontology, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and I will say that, like, especially with attachment style stuff, I feel like I've heard people like say they do frame it pretty well. They keep it from being like, a hard thing in themselves. Where it's like, a person will be like, "Oh, I was disorganized attacher, but now like I practice like, good attaching." But then it's also like psychology has no internal telos to it. I mean, there's very little there that actually does offer a balance to like what are the virtues? Like what are the virtues
Mm.
in psychology? Like they don't know. Like what is a healthy individual in psychology? They have people who guess. They have moral philosophers. They train little moral philosophers who have sort of intuitions about that, about what that is, and then they kind of like send them off to like try to make a healthy individual. But like there's no codified, like there's no philosophy behind that as far as I can say. I'm probably
You're
speaking out.
describing like a counselor. Is that what you're sort of?
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
counselor is a little moral philosopher, and I don't want to critique
No.
counselors.
This is super interesting.
Yeah, no, counselors are great. But they're moral philosophers that need like a little bit more of the philosophy.
Right, and this is sort of probably where you could connect it to Peugeot. Is I would think someone like that would be more like you've got to understand, and Peterson as well. Basically, I guess you don't have to link it to Judeo-Christian values, but you could say like that needs to be sort of the foundation for you to even have a conception of what is the truth or what is the good as
Yeah.
a baseline. Otherwise, there's too much chaos. You can't be a proper agent of good without that foundation essentially in place.
Yeah. I mean, with the Judeo-Christian stuff, it's really complicated because that's unfortunately something that a lot of Christians have lost sight of too. What is what is a saint for many Christians is like not something that they really have any conception of. It's like I got saved, whatever. I'm good. I guess I won't go to hell now. I guess I'll just like do whatever I want. I guess I'll just like make a bunch of money and like I guess give some of that to charity so I don't go to hell, but I'm already saved. I don't know. Like they don't have a conception of what a saint is. And a saint would be like someone who's full of the virtues. Not just the virtues, but the Holy Spirit as well. Yeah.
I think if I were to, I would like to take a deeper dive into like Christian mysticism because I haven't really done that yet. I would think if I were to revisit something like Catholicism or just any branch of Christianity, I would probably like, I don't know if you agree with this, but like there's certain rules there where you would say like that's separate from like what's really important. As in they might have like specific rules in the Bible, like don't eat, I don't know if this is even a real example, but they might say like don't eat shellfish or something. I would think that that's not super relevant to like the core philosophy there.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know how strict you are as a Catholic, or if there's certain things where you're like, this is not really the meat and potatoes here. This is not the essential parts. These are just sort of some extra things that are not critical to what's of value here. So I would think if I were approaching it, like I couldn't imagine myself following all the rules because there's certain things where I'm like, why would God want me to do this specifically? Like this seems a little too
to not eat shellfish, for example. I mean,
yeah, maybe it's symbolically relevant in a way I don't understand yet.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's true for most of the kosher rules, but I mean, most of those rules, those like very specific rules in the Old Testament, like you as a Christian are not compelled to follow them because you're not Jewish. Okay. You're not Jewish, and also Christ died, and you've died with Christ, so you're no longer attached with to those rules. That's how St. Paul explains why we are free from those laws. the Christian position is that you're supposed to do things that allow you to have the Holy Spirit, and like there are going to be specific things that make the Holy Spirit flee from you if you do them, and those might look kind of like arbitrary, but they're not. I mean, it's just not.
They're not arbitrary. Like there's some sort of deeper symbolic meaning there. That is,
yeah, like not eating meat. Well, not just symbolic meaning, but like sometimes it's just a matter of obedience. Like existing in a hierarchy is also seems to be a way in which you receive the Holy Spirit, right? Because that's what Christ does. That's what the Son does with the Father, and you're imitating that by being in a hierarchy. So like not eating meat on Friday during Lent, like that has a symbolic meaning for Catholics, right? Like you're fighting the passions on the day that Christ died. But it's not a sin because of the symbolic meaning. It's a sin because you're being disobedient to the hierarchy if you depart from that.
Okay. So there's certain rules like that where you feel it's not really about whether they make sense or not, but more about you need to it's sort of a re-verification of your obedience to this higher power.
Yeah.
That you continually be like, I won't eat meat because God, who is the authority here, is saying not to eat meat. And this is part of my, sacrifice, so to speak.
Yeah, it's part of your fighting against self-will. Yeah.
It's showing a commitment.
Yep.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So I mean, we can cut this or whatever, but like, what was your experience of Catholicism? I'm just curious.
Well, I was very young at the time. You know what I mean? Like I the last time I went to church, I was probably in my early teens. I actually did end up going through a communion, bread and blood, or body and blood of Christ, that sort of thing. I went through that. So yeah, I was, I guess, baptized as a baby, and then what do they refer to that as? Is it not communion? It is communion. Confirmation.
Yeah, that's like the third initiation sacrament.
Okay. So they're all, those are all considered sacraments, even the baptism part.
Yeah, baptism, communion, confirmation, those are all sacraments.
Yeah, if I probably did go through all three of them, but I was very, very young, and I wasn't old enough to sort of appreciate maybe what is happening there. So out of my own curiosity, not saying that that's the best motive, but that would be my current motive, is I would want to explore it further, just because there's maybe something there that I haven't seen. Like you, like I went through, where I was, 17 years old, and I was, basically an atheist or whatever.
Yeah.
And basically I was more of a materialist, like reducing everything to kind of like when we talked about consciousness, like what was the word you used when it's sort of just not epiphenomenon, like it's just basically everything is just an expression of, or what do they call it? There was another word. There was a specific word. It wasn't epiphenomenon. There was another one where it's just like, an emergent, like everything's just an emergent phenomenon of like, the atoms, the physics of it. And that was sort of like my view, and it wasn't, but I actually got into more like Eastern spiritual stuff because I was curious about that, because that was more, at the time, that was more of an easy door for me to open, because they weren't really saying anything. They were kind of just like, basically their move is to instead be like, throw away the attachment to your body and mind, because those are just accumulations. And if you can attach to an identification with the body and the mind, then you can transcend to higher levels of perception, essentially, was sort of the Eastern, sort of the New Age Eastern approach that I was exploring, which is a lot of like meditation practices were kind of like that, where you're trying to release your attachment to the material so that you can reach higher levels of consciousness. Now, maybe there's an analog there to something in Christianity that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you ever get into Eastern stuff, or reasons why you thought Eastern stuff was not the answer? if you explored more than one
Not
religious
really.
possibility.
Not really. I just didn't. It was never that compelling to me. Eastern stuff. It seemed a little. It always seemed a little too. It seemed like too much my own tendency, like my own tendency towards abstraction and like, not paying attention to the body. I was like, I don't know if I really need to lean into that. It seemed to be offering me anything like super different from what I'm already doing. Like I already don't really pay attention to my body. Yeah, and there was just no romance in it. Like that was my impression. There was no romance in it. Whereas like Christianity is like romance is like so central to what it is. But then it also has the very like metaphysical stuff too. So that's what I
For
like.
the audience, you mean something very specific, I think, when you say romance, because they have a certain association. I would imagine, are you referring almost to not duality in the socionic sense, but sort of like, I don't know, maybe the relationship between order and chaos or heaven and earth? Like, is that kind of what you're getting at when you talk about romance as a abstraction, or do you want to expand on this a bit?
I wouldn't put romance in terms of the relationship. I mean, there is a way in which that's true, but the heaven and earth stuff is a kind of like that's an after the fact thing. I mean, I guess when I'm talking about Christianity, it's both the romantic kind of adventure idea, right? It's like there is you're being called on an adventure specifically.
This reminds me of romanticism, which I did study a little bit in college.
Yeah, and but then there's also like the fact that it is specifically a relationship between persons, right? It is. I mean, the central mystery of Christianity is the Trinity, which is this like relationship of love between persons, and that's what you're called into it as a Christian. Like you're called to be part of that relationship of love. Yeah. So what's more romantic than that? Like, come on.
With this idea of romanticism, for example, or you're saying like there's a call to adventure there. It reminds me of Jordan Peterson talking about to slay the dragon, so to speak. Like that aspect of romance, you believe is embedded in Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, because it's very concrete. Like this happened, and now you are in this story. Like Christ died, and now you get to be part of his body. That is the story. Like that is a physical story that happened at a specific time, and like it relates to your specific environment now. It's not this like, oh, all of reality is really just being consciousness and bliss, and you should just go there.
So the call to adventure is being sort of a part of this thing that's larger than yourself, or I guess you could say like the war between good and evil.
Yeah, happening.
Order and chaos, like being a part of that. That is the call to adventure, the romanticism of Christianity, in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what I wanted to go with. But anyways, so before you go, let's talk a little bit about notions of duality, and perhaps of those juxtapose your own ideas about the inferior function, that sort of thing. If you wanted to take the floor and just sort of say what's on your mind there.
I mean, one of my closest friends is ISFJ, and there's very much just a very smooth thing between us. Like it's extremely smooth. I don't know how to say it. Like it's as if I'm talking to like a part of me or something. Like almost like it's just. I mean, we've known each other forever, like since like second grade or whatever. And when we're in person, like it's just the dance. Just there's no interruptions at the dance. But I mean, okay, I hate the notion of duality. I hate it. And I even kind of hate it in the way like it's not just that I hate the the specific that it's the repressed function type, it's the opposite type that's supposed to be the best match. I even kind of hate it in the Myers-Briggs world, and like you search like ENTP on Instagram, and like you get like 100 like ENTP INFJ things. It's like, okay, obviously there's like people are seeing a thing there, and like they're empirically, doing kind of honest things, but it's like, I don't know, it just kind of distorts what relationships are and what they're supposed to be, especially romantic relationships. Like, I don't know, I just feel like this is kind of not really a typology rant. This is more just like a moralizing.
No.
So, but whatever. But I just feel like in the modern Western world, we put so much emphasis on the like spousal relationship, because it's like for so many people, it's going to be like consuming like 80% of your life, like, or it's just like interactions with your spouse, and it's just not like in more traditional societies, you would have large friend groups that you would also be a part of, and large associations that you would also be a part of, and like your spouse you would interact with them and you would work well with them, but like you wouldn't necessarily have to have like, you wouldn't have to be like best friends with your spouse. And I know that's attractive, and I'm very attracted to that as well. I don't I don't date people that I don't like, or I try not to, like, that I can't like respect on an intellectual and kind of like even a spiritual level, or there's some kind of parity. So like I kind of, I fall into this as well. But yeah, I think I've heard some statements from Auschwitz, that are like, are you kidding me? Like, this is the purpose of your life, is finding a dual relationship. It's like,
Yeah.
maybe I'm being hyperbolic there, but like,
No,
I don't.
no. I mean, I've made some videos touching on that as well. I mean, you have sympathy for it in that obviously people get into dysfunctional relationships and they're seeking some sort of proper, what they feel is like some sort of fundamental chemistry between them and another person that
Yeah.
would make the relationship sustainable, optimal,
Yeah.
and for each other's growth as well. When you were talking about duality, it sounded like you're basically saying like, yeah, it was smooth, but maybe it wasn't the best. There wasn't the best sort of on a deeper level beyond sort of the surface. There were some issues.
But I mean, if I
But
were,
you're also making the point that even the ENTP INFJ thing isn't perfect either, because you're saying that relationships go beyond type, and it can't really be limited to type. Like whether you have the Socionics conception or the more Myers Briggs, ENTP INFJ thing, it's like neither of those are correct in the sense that you're saying that relationships to be sustainable go a lot deeper than the Jungian type level or the sociotype level.
yeah,
It sounds like that's what you're saying. And it
yeah,
also sounds like maybe you're implying that there is perhaps a Christian foundation there that would be optimal in terms of a sustainable relationship.
yeah. The Christian conception of marriage is not that your spouse is supposed to satisfy your longing. Like, there is a sense in which that's true, in which that man is meant for woman, that it is not good for a man to be alone. But there's also a sense in which your relationship with your spouse is supposed to be a cross, and is supposed to actually help you transcend your own selfish desires, or not even just selfish desires, but your own desires, just your pure self-will. You are supposed to be able to find like true agape, true like willing the good of the other, that doesn't involve this self-will thing. That's what that's what the Christian life is oriented towards in general, and marriage is part of that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess what I would be curious about is, even like if we erase type out of this equation altogether, I would still think like you would probably want there to be some compatibility there,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
chemistry, and maybe, I don't know, you may disagree. Like I would think that you'd want there to be some passion there, some sparks. Like I understand you're saying that in some sense marriage doesn't even necessarily need that, because it's not about you, it's about essentially some sort of transcendent thing here that you're alluding to. I would almost feel that the the trap people can get into is if they get into a marriage with that premise, and then there's certain things that I think are sort of embedded in human nature that in order for it to be ultimately sustainable, there does need to be an attraction there, whether it be a combination of physical, intellectual, all those different things. Like I would think you'd want it to be the complete package as much as possible in order for it to be long-term sustainable. Because I think there's countless examples of people getting into marriages through sort of the structure of a religion, and then ultimately it doesn't work out because there was something fundamentally incompatible there.
What do you mean it doesn't work out, though? In what sense doesn't it work out?
Like maybe they were both Christian,
or
maybe they were both Christian, and the marriage was sort of built on that foundation. But then on a personal level, there was some sort of emotional incompatibility, and that can't quite be transcended. Like that is a factor regardless, it would seem.
Okay, no. but so but you are basing though the success of the marriage on some kind of emotional basis when you're talking about it like that, right?
Not strictly emotional. I think you'd want a variety of things there. You'd want there to be, I think, physical attraction, emotional attraction, and intellectual attraction. I think you'd want all. I think you'd want all three of those before tying the knot. In my opinion.
And I agree. I mean, I agree with that. Like, I am someone who I am a romantic. Like, I would not do the like Puritan thing where like my wife is like purely like a functional thing in my world. Yeah, and I do know that specifically for myself, like there is a specific like INFJ thing for me that like is very sparky, whatever. So like yeah, I don't want to overstate my case, but like I wouldn't want anybody to like who is married already to hear this sort of thing and be like, oh, this is why my marriage isn't working, and like and my marriage is about my attraction. It's like people in these more traditional societies where like they get like do arranged marriages, like they are able to make those marriages, you know, quote unquote work, right? Like spend their lives together because they have so much like external structure as well. Like they have religion, they have friends, etc. But yeah, I mean,
I see what you're getting at. I guess my and this could be a flaw. I'm open to this being a flaw in my thinking. I guess I anticipate there being some, if that was the sort of North Star there, if that was the glue that was holding it together, I don't know. I'd be concerned about there being problems under the hood. Like even if the marriage stays together, I guess I'm not. And I know I have to be careful here because I'm not trying to influence people to jump out of their marriage because I'm saying that, hey, you need to be compatible. I know I have to be, responsible here.
Yeah.
But there, I do have a tendency to think like just because you're able to make it function on the surface,
sure,
doesn't mean there aren't issues under the hood, so to speak.
Sure.
But of course, those need to be figured out before I think people get married. But obviously, once people are already married, we can moralize about whether we think, I would assume that in the Christian tradition, you would say like, let it run its course. Like, that would maybe be more your stance, and maybe I'm a bit more, secular or whatever, and I'm saying like, okay, like I would not want people to keep this thing going if there is not true passionate love there.
Yeah. And and it's a good critique that you offer. Like I am being a little bit overly sociological in my, marriage thinking, and it's like that's even like really not how I do think. That is kind of like that's a bit of like a defensive thing. But it's like, I think I don't know, because I'm, not married or whatever, but like there seems to also be this spiritual possibility that happens when you do have like problems, but that you like bring them, I'll be very unabashedly Christian here, like bring them to Christ in prayer. Like there is a way in which like these natural things, like even a disjunct naturally is potentially fruitful. And
you're saying transmute that. It's kind of like alchemy. Transmute that energy into something good. Like if there are problems, that can be a conduit for you to basically explore your faith, and you can basically transmute that problem into something higher.
And there seems to be, and I have intuitions of this. There seems to be in which like the problems are almost like the point of the marriage, like that there is a spiritual intimacy that can obtain through those problems. And those things will, that can also lead to like a real kind of sense of natural peace in the relationship as well. I mean, I'm very heavily speculating here, as I've not honestly even dated that much, like, so, but that's what I see potentially there.
No, yeah. No, I get where you're coming from, and on that topic, I'll leave it there. I think there's a lot to reflect on there for both ourselves and the audience. Before we wrap up, just briefly, we were talking last time about 4 function models versus 8 function models. Now, I guess I am curious, like, you have sort of the conception, like, okay, for example, there's intuition, and then that's the function, and then there's the attitudes. You could have it expressed in an extroverted attitude or an introverted attitude. So to say you have both is kind of maybe dumb in that framework, is maybe your stance to an extent. Do you? I know Michael Pearson, his book was kind of playing with sort of the relationship to the shadow functions, or like the sub functions, so to speak. Like, do you have in your own understanding, like, your relationship to, example, I don't know, introverted intuition or extroverted? Like, do you believe, if we define these things even on their most fundamental level, do you not think that on some level you are also engaged in those kinds of information domains, despite them not being a part of your quote unquote front stack or valued stack, so to speak? Like,
well,
do you not think we could map and eventually find examples of you engaged in extroverted thinking? Maybe it wouldn't be a sustained thing, but do you not think that could be done? Or it would just be like definitionally wouldn't make sense? Or like,
it goes to, I think it goes to what you think the functions are. Obviously, I don't even, there's a thing in my thinking about the functions which makes me doubt that it's actually even mental activity. Like, I don't think you could even reduce the functions to mental activity, because it seemed to me like they almost like transcend you in a certain way, that like it seems like they're almost more like, I've said this to some people, I don't know if I've said this publicly, it's like they're almost more like angels. Like they're almost more like these forces which act in you, and constrain you in ways that are beyond you. And so if it is a force beyond you, even if I do specific things which, maybe it's like kind of correlated with extroverted thinking, that is not a force beyond me. That's just kind of, like, oh, I happen to do like an activity.
okay,
those sort of extroverted thinking.
So you would treat your 4 functions as maybe sort of reoccurring poetic themes in your life, effectively.
Beyond that, but they would be almost like intelligences which like are designed to make those themes happen. This kind of goes into our discussion of will and consciousness and stuff, but like there is something beyond the structures which wants those structures to kind of obtain.
Okay, so these are your sort of angels on your shoulder that kind of come and essentially affect you, almost as like almost as like an outside influence. No?
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. Almost like guardian angels. Yeah.
So separating that from like first order cognition type stuff, essentially, like taking, as in like they're not really cognitive, is what you're saying.
In themselves, they are not cognitive, but they affect cognition, and they affect specific kinds of cognition.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a very novel way of thinking about the functions. But that's why I'm really not drawn to 8-function models. I mean, the other reason is that the information domain thing, like, I think that belongs more properly to the 4 things, like intuition, thinking, feeling, sensing. Like, that's, if you want to do some kind of socionics, like information aspects thing, it's more properly there. And then like the stitching versus exploding is, differentiates them.
Right. So like it's kind of just to take one person and say like, oh, in this case they were using their extrovert intuition, and in this other case they're using their backstack NI. You wouldn't do it that way, because you would basically say there's one intuition, and then the attitude is what's unique to the individual.
Yeah.
Right, because it's like they're just different sides of the same coin. To separate them into 2 different parts is maybe sort of missing the point on that level. You might argue.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll wrap this up.
Man, I feel like I ranted a lot this time. Sorry.
Well, no, that's what I wanted, because last time I was a blabbermouth, and I was like, at first I was like, it needs more structure, which I didn't do much either, but I was like, I think the big problem is I do need to maybe step back a bit and let the guest speak, and I wanted to do that more this time, so I'm happy. If you feel that way, that means I did my job.
Nice. I also totally think Peugeot is ENTP now. I'm settled on that, just by like the way I've acted in this interview. Maybe I'm just imitating Peugeot, but I'm like, no, he's definitely ENTP. I see.
Matthew or Jonathan?
Jonathan. No, Matthew is the biggest INTP ever, but Jonathan's definitely ENTP.
Right, because you originally thought Jonathan was ENFP.
I was not sure. I mean, he's a lefty. He's a left-handed guy, so that complicates things. But no,
maybe I'm stupid. Do you literally mean left-handed?
Yeah, he's literally left-handed. But I mean, it also has like a spiritual, I don't know, like a.
Okay, that's okay. That's really, now that's fascinating. now I don't want to. Now you got me excited. Fuck, that's. You know what? It's funny, and that's why there's some stuff. I know you're not into the Eastern stuff, but if you look into like Indian mysticism, like they've got a lot of stuff too, where it's like the connections between these bodily expression patterns, almost like whether you're like left-handed or whatever, like they would, like there's a million pathways to enlightenment, and there's all these different individual peculiarities that represent something in the spiritual plane, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, what I think that stuff is great. My instinct when I hear that stuff is like, I want to bring that into the Christian story. It's like, that stuff is awesome. Like, and there's nothing about that seems like super anti-Christian, I want to do this integrating thing.
Yeah, my thing is, and probably maybe different than yours, is like I would probably be more likely to look at different world religions and try to tie them together. And maybe that's a mistake, because there might be direct contradictions, but I would probably try to find like a thread line. Like I'd be like, well, why would, and this is just my own biases, like why would God, create an avenue for these people over here on the globe to have the opportunity to engage in his glory, and then these other people that are just completely fed the wrong information and are on a bad path, and there's nothing they can really do about it. Like I would want to be more optimistic, like maybe they're all in some sense touching on the same elephant, so to speak, and but it's been explained and distorted by language in so many different ways that maybe it seems like they're different, but there is like some sort of common thread line that can be tapped into from all these different. I haven't looked enough into different world religions to know, like, I mean, I'm sure there's so many contradictions between them that you can definitely argue that they're just incompatible on some fundamental level. But that would be my own curiosity bias.
Totally. I mean, there's ways you can do that within Christianity. It's called Christian Hermeticism. The Meditations on the Tarot book is very much into that. I'd be pretty curious what you think about that book. Yeah.
You can link it to me.
Yeah, Meditations
through email, and I'll look at it. I'm gonna thank you for coming. I'm gonna end the recording. Yep. Can you stay like just for a second after?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to ask you some stuff off air.
Sure.
Thank you. And check out John's channel. I'll link it in the description. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.